and welcome to The Environment Matters, a monthly production of the Environmental Protection Agency in Guyana, where we explore the work of the agency in fulfilling its mandate of environmental management and biodiversity conservation. One of the key functions of the EPA is laid out in the Environmental Protection Act, and that is preventing or controlling pollution. In this month's episode, we're going to talk about a hot button issue that has been engaging our attention. And with me today are two officers who are attached to the Technical Services Department, which encompasses a research and development aspect. So I'd like to welcome back to the show Mr. Shannon Redmond and Miss Gwanetta Fordyce.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So before taking a deep dive into the EPA's roles and functions, let's lay the groundwork for this particular topic. And the topic, of course, is radiation. There has been some public concern about radiation and radioactive sources that are being used in Guyana. So before we talk about how the agency goes about managing this particular sector, let's put the science behind it. What is radiation?
Okay, Arita, thanks for having us. Arita, radiation is all around us. It's in our everyday life. We receive radiation from the ground. We receive radiation from the sun. We even receive radiation from our microwaves that we use every day. So, in essence, in looking at the broad term of radiation, radiation is energy, right? Radiation is, in essence, energy in the form of wave. So, you have electromagnetic spectrum, and then there is radiation. Once it passes that wavelength or radio or electromagnetic spectrum and it goes to the spectrum that is higher and the energy is more intense, we have ionizing radiation happening there. So there's two forms of radiation: ionizing radiation and non-ionizing radiation. Ionizing radiation is in the form of X-rays, gamma rays, alpha particles, beta particles. Non-ionizing radiation is from, like I mentioned before, microwaves, the sun rays, wave from our, radio sets, telephone poles that we have, we receive connections from to make our calls. So that's in sum. Radiation is energy or particles in the form of energy.
All right. So for those of us who would have wavered a bit in high school science, there you have it. That little bit of background on radiation. Now, one of the things I've been looking at is radiation and radioactivity the same thing?
No, good question. Radiation is energy, and once that energy is broken down, it breaks down in radioactive decay. So you have radiation being the energy, and radioactivity is when radiation is emitted.
All right, so that's quite a bit to absorb there. So for the listeners out there, for the viewers of this program, how concerned then should the public be about radiation in Guyana? Because you've already stated that radiation is all around us. We receive exposure to radiation in different ways. But when it comes to persons who are importing radioactive sources, etc., how concerned should the public be about radiation?
Okay, so
Yes.
I think we need to understand a bit what sources are in country. So in 2017, supported by the International Atomic Energy Agency, commonly referred to as the IEA, which is the international body that manages the peaceful use of atoms, supported the government of Guyana, particularly the EPA and the Ministry of Health, in conducting an inventory of sources. Through this inventory of sources, we were able to identify all of the areas that have radioactive sources. Radioactive sources tend to be sealed. So when we are talking about the applications of non-ionizing radiation, it's not that the source is exposed that persons can touch. Radioactive sources are in sealed, encapsulated pieces of equipment and are protected so that that radioactivity does not pose a threat to persons. So our inventory of sources would have looked at the categories of sources we have in country. The IAEA would have established that there are 5 categories of sources, ranging from category 1 to category 5. And in this case, category 1 is the strongest source.
Okay.
In country now, we do not have any category 1 source. A nuclear power plant tends to be a category 1 source. And as you may well be aware, there are no nuclear plants in country. There are category 2 to 5 sources in country. Category 2, which is the second one, is in limited quantities. And this source, while it is staged as category 2, it does not pose a risk to persons outside of 100 meters from where the source is. So one of the ways the IAEA explains the impact of exposure to radiation is looking at if a source was to become dispersed. There was a fire, there was an incident, and the radioactive source becomes dispersed. And when you look at category 2 sources, they are not expected to have any long-term impact on persons outside of 100 meters radius. The majority of sources in country tend to be category 3 to 5 sources, with 5 being the least. Those are some of the sources we'd find in the medical sector, in the dental shops, dental facilities. They would utilize the lower activity level sources, category 5s. So it is important to note that your concern should be based upon the category of the source and how well the source is being managed. And that is why the EPA is playing this role in ensuring that all sources are within regulatory control to ensure safe and secure management of the sources. Safety in terms of adequate physical protection systems, as well as security in terms of delaying and detecting any threats to the source. So safety and security help to ensure that persons' exposure to radiation is reduced.
All right, so you mentioned that inventory of radioactive sources. So aside from the medical sector, what other sectors utilize radioactive sources?
A number of sectors. So popularly the construction sector, they utilize nuclear gauges.
There would be things in there that would surprise us.
Yep.
So.
They utilize a cesium source, and that source is, as I mentioned, only becomes, it's encapsulated and only becomes exposed when in use. And in use would be when it's released into the soil, right? So the nuclear gauges detect moisture density within the particular sample. So when that source is released, that is when there is possible exposure to radiation. It's trained personnel that would have been trained in radiation safety should be utilizing that equipment. So it's not the public should have no exposure to that. There should be a barrier between that nuclear gauge and others when it's in use. When it's not in use, it's placed back into its protective shielding and it's stored within protective, a chest basically. that has the thickness to ensure that the potential for radiation exposure is reduced. So these are some of the systems that are required, not only nationally but internationally.
Yes, so that actually is one of the things that we will talk about later on in the program.
But
So,
before I
yes.
continue, we've got construction.
Yes.
We have got, as you pointed out,
medical,
medical.
right.
We have got applications in the oil and gas sector. And the applications in the oil and gas sector can be either at the well logging phase or they can be at the industrial radiography phase. So we're very familiar with getting an X-ray, a medical radiography, but there is also industrial radiography that utilizes a similar technology to ensure that when pipes are welded and sealed, that there are no cracks and fissures, that the work is done properly. So these are the primary uses of radioactivity in radiation in the industrial sector. There are some applications in mining as well as manufacturing, beverage manufacturing. So you look, sometimes you utilize, you're all sitting and we all get a bottle of Coke and we're looking to see which bottle of Coke has the most. Radiation technology ensures that all of the bottles have the same level, that it's filled to the same level. So radiation is used practically daily to ensure a quality life for individuals.
All right, and that's a very interesting application of radiation in everyday life. So Tishan, I want to continue with you to ask, is there a risk? I know you would have brought it out, but we want to assure persons, is there a risk to public safety from the current operations or from the current applications of radioactive materials within the various sectors?
Okay, so as pointed out earlier, the primary sources in country are categories 3 to 5, right? These sources are not known to cause significant impact to health less than 100 meters away, right? As a result of that, we ensure that adequate systems are put in place, that the sources are handled properly. Proper storage, proper training for those who handle them, proper security so that they don't they're not stolen and end up in the wrong hands. So let's put, for example, the industrial radiography application, which utilizes iridium-192. For that facility to be authorized by the agency, they would have to demonstrate adequate safety and security measures. So they'd have to have a shelter that does not expose the source to elements of weather. They'll have to have systems in place to restrict access to the source to only authorized personnel. And in this case, authorized personnel would be persons who are trained, and they would have to demonstrate that the personnel using it are competent and have been adequately trained to utilize the source.
Right.
So those are some of the mechanisms by which we seek to ensure that the public is not exposed to radiation.
Okay, so I want to now go into the EPA's role in the management of radioactive materials.
I think Gwyneth and I can possibly tag this, but we do require environmental submission of an application, and that application can be found on the agency's website. It's titled an application for radioactive sources, and within it, it deals with nuclear safety as well as radiation protection.
Right, so I think Gwinnetta can step in here and just for any developer who is viewing the program and of course for the assurance of the public, what are some of the things that we ask for in that application?
Okay, so once a developer, whether it's importing the source, whether it's for transport, whether it's for use, a developer, like Tashana mentioned, must submit an application for environmental authorization. Key documents that are required to accompany that application in order for the agency to decide whether or not that developer is competent to utilize the material in country includes definitely proof of ownership of the land or the facility once you're storing. If you're transporting, a security plan for transport. Once you're setting up shop at a location, a security plan for that area or that location. A radiation safety manual. The manual, in essence, provides the agency with information as to whether or not that developer is competent as it relates to the management or the overall management of the radiation material or radioactive material. As well as the certification, like Tashana mentioned, that in order for the agency to move on with the application or to decide whether or not we're going to issue you with an environmental authorization, is a certification of the radiation safety officer, the names of the radiation safety officer. I think I about cover much of
a critical aspect is that they have to share with us their inventory of sources. So we did the initial inventory in 2017 and we continue to build on that inventory. The inventory allows us to know, one, where the sources are, who are the responsible persons for the sources, the activity level of the sources, and as a result of that, we can categorize them, whether it is category 1 to 5. So once you submit an application to the agency, you're required to submit, along with your application, an inventory of your sources.
Okay.
We verify that inventory, and it allows us to update the national inventory of sources. So that's another key component of the application process.
All right, so that has been quite a bit to take in. It's time for an ad break, and we hope that you stay with us to hear more about the EPA's management of radiation in Guyana. Are you involved in a business or thinking about starting one? Do you know there may be environmental impacts from business activities? According to the Environmental Protection Act of 1996, businesses such as gas stations, rice mills, large-scale agriculture and poultry farms, large-scale mining and forestry operations, hotels, and resorts must be authorized. Persons proposing any of these activities need to submit an application for environmental authorization to the EPA.
Do you have an environmental complaint? Then the Environmental Protection Agency wishes to advise that you can report an environmental complaint at the agency via one of the following. You can call our 24-hour hotline number at 225-5469, or you can drop us an email at complaints@epaguyana.org. Or you can message us on our Facebook page at EPA Guyana, or you can message us directly on Instagram at EPAGY. Please note, when submitting an environmental complaint, you would need to submit the following: name of complainant, that is the person who is making the complaint, the address of that person, a contact number, as well as the alleged polluter, a name for them, or a name of their business, their location, and the nature of the complaint. For further information, you can visit our agency's head office at Ganji Street, Sophia, or you can visit one of the regional offices to make your environmental complaint. You can visit our WIM office in the Quarantine or our Linden office in the Lynn Building, Mackenzie, Linden. Please note that all information collected from the public will be treated with the strictest confidence. However, complainants should be willing to attend court and testify should the matter require legal action.
Miss Sonia, wait, I want to ask you something.
Oh gosh,
Morning, Miss Sonia.
Morning, Miss Cheryl. I'm late for work.
I noticed the other day y'all had a big campaign with them police officers, so shutting down them people barbecue, wedding, dance. Man, how y'all expect these people to make money and survive?
Oh, Miss Cheryl, that is far from the truth. The EPA and the Guyana Police Force are actually working together to ensure that persons who conduct certain businesses and activities are authorized. We've tried to allow them to adhere to the noise regulations.
Well, this gotta be a new law. What law is this?
These laws were always in place. It's now that we're getting all these complaints at the agency, we are trying to enforce them. The Environmental Protection Act has been in place since 1996, and it states that persons and businesses must apply for environmental authorization before operating a sound-making device.
Well, girl, I never know this thing is prior to the law.
So if you're keeping a barbecue or an open-air function, like a wedding or a concert, especially in your community, right, and you're playing a music system, you have to apply for a short-term noise permit. And for persons that operate in a business and you got generators and stuff, you have to apply for a long-term permit. And that is applicable to bars and hotspots and clubs also.
Well, now that you explain it, I understand it. It's unfair to the elderly, sick people, and even them little children.
That is correct. According to the World Health Organization, loud noise can cause stress, sleep deprivation, and hearing impairment, and I'm sure you wouldn't want that.
Oh, now I understand. Thank you for explaining it, Miss Sonia.
For more information, you can contact the EPA at 225-5471 or visit our office at Ganges Street, North Sophia, Georgetown.
Welcome back to the Environment Matters. If you're now joining us, during the first half of the program, Mr. Shannon Redmond and Ms. Gwynetta Fordyce, who are part of the Technical Services Department at the EPA, were enlightening us about radiation and the uses of radiation in Guyana. We also talked about the EPA's role in the management of radioactive materials in Guyana. So I'd like for us to now continue our discussion on EPA's role in finding out how does the agency go about fulfilling its mandate in this regard.
So one, we talked about the authorization process, and the authorization process is a key component of managing radioactive sources. The IEA calls for all sources to be under regulatory control, and regulatory control ensures the safety and the security of the sources in question. Another key aspect of our role is monitoring. We just don't issue a permit and leave the facility unattended to, unmanaged. They are required to report to us. So one of the things that happens is that sources would move. They would be transported from one jurisdiction into Guyana. They may be transported from onshore Guyana to offshore Guyana. That requires notification. The agency is notified of any movement in sources from one location to the other. We also monitor facilities. We have our own radiation detection equipment, and we will go out routinely and seek to ensure that the radiation dose at a particular facility is not outside of the required public exposure limit. So there are two different limits for occupational exposure, whereby persons work with radiation versus persons who are in the public. So we monitor at boundary line to ensure and within the immediate environs of the facility to ensure that the radiation dose is within the required limit. I'm happy to say that our recent detection exercises have confirmed that the radiation dose is not above the allowable limit. So persons, commercial activities, in some instances residential facilities that are in proximity to facilities storing radioactive sources are not being exposed to radiation above the IAEA's stipulated public exposure standard. So that's another way we ensure compliance. We ensure that the conditions of the permit issued are being adhered to.
Great. So, Gwynetta, over to you. You're one of the officers who works with developers, who works in the environmental authorization process. So you not only work with developers, but we work with other government agencies. Can you talk about some of those agencies and what are their roles? Just briefly.
Sure. With the agency have playing the role of first development consent, we also collaborate with many of our sister agencies, including the Central Housing and Planning Authority, the Guyana Revenue Authority, more so customs for the importation of these sources, especially including as well the Maritime Administration Department, all of these agencies locally. As it relates to our international collaboration, Tishana has been mentioning exclusively the International Atomic Energy Agency, as well as officers generally as we train, because we do have exposure to training opportunities. We tend to collaborate with regional agencies as well as international agencies. For example, the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, the U.S. Nuclear Safety Commission. So we have been collaborating extensively locally as well as our regional partners and our international partners.
All right. So I want to, bring the program to a close by talking about the EPA's capacity to not only monitor but really to manage this particular sector, if you will. So we can talk about the training and the equipment that you have in place. So I guess, Tishana, we'll start with you.
All right. So Guyana joined the International Atomic Energy Agency in January 2015. And since then, we have been able to benefit from several technical cooperation projects under the IEA. These technical cooperation projects have afforded us the opportunity for training, for expert missions, as well as the provision of equipment. The provision of equipment is not only towards the EPA, because there are other stakeholders that Gwynetta would have mentioned that also require the capacity to detect radiation. So recently, the Guyana Police Force, the Guyana Fire Service, the Civil Defense Commission would have all been privy, as well as the Ministry of Health, to equipment that can detect radiation. We have also been privy to training both nationally. A few years ago, we would have hosted a basic radiation safety training whereby we trained in excess of 50 persons nationally in basic radiation safety. So we benefit from training. COVID would have affected our movements, but we were still able to host two expert missions that developed a roadmap as well as aided us in the development of SOPs for the management of radiation nationally. We also would have benefited from regional trainings whereby we met with our counterparts who are also in a developmental phase in managing radiation effectively. So, as it relates to our capacity, we are constantly building on our capacity to ensure that we have skilled and competent persons who can manage radiation locally.
All right, Donette, over to you.
Okay, so we have currently the radiation backpack. It looks like a normal backpack, but it's more on the end where you're able to go into the field, you have the equipment on your back, and then there's an interface that you hold in your hand that will actually, as you walk around, the equipment basically picks up the radiation dose and it's recorded on the screen or the interface. It looks like a cell phone like you're holding. Okay. So you can be in the field, you can be in the airport, so you have on this backpack and there's this interface or this equipment in your hand that looks like a cell phone, and persons basically wouldn't know that it's a radiation detection backpack that is providing you with a dose rate that persons are exposed to.
Yeah, that sounds pretty cool.
And
So,
the
yes.
the equipment can also detect the radioisotope.
Yes, it can also indicate whether it's a cesium-137, a radium-192, whatever the source is around, that equipment can detect and inform the officer who is recording that data what is the isotope within the area that you're monitoring.
All right. And so, aside from the radiation backpack, is there any other equipment that we use to
Manage
or to monitor radiation?
We have survey meters which can detect contamination. If you are exposed, they can do that. We also have TLDs, which basically monitor officer exposure.
Personal.
So an officer can wear this when they are going into the field to do an inspection. It can be set to the threshold, the allowable limit for exposure, and if that is exceeded, it alarms. So we do have those equipment in country at the agency, and we were expected to get a few more items by mid-year.
Now this backpack, if you see an officer walking around, it looks like a normal cool backpack that you can walk around, throw on your back. But what it really is, it allows us to know what radiation levels the general public may be exposed to. So the Environmental Protection Agency is a member of the Guyana is a member of the International Atomic Energy Agency. So we have received this backpack to aid in our regulatory infrastructure to ensure that we are capable of adhering or ensuring compliance, or companies are adhering to international best practices to ensure compliance with radiation levels, and it's keeping and it's not necessarily causing harm to human health and the environment. So this backpack basically provides us with the levels. So when you put it on, you basically read off on the screen what levels you are exposed to, and if it exceeds the annual exposure levels or any exposure levels within a 24-hour period. Just to note as well, this can also tell us what sources you may be exposed to. So let's say it's cesium-137, it's americium, arborescium, whatever is the type of source that you may be exposed to, it's able to tell us. It can also tell us the levels that you're exposed to as well.
Yes, and of course we will share that with you, the public. So rest assured that the EPA is taking its role seriously when it comes to environmental management and biodiversity conservation, and we are working in the best interests of the Guyanese public. And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings us to the end of our program. Thank you so much for joining us. And do remember to stay connected to the EPA. You can pick up a copy of the Sunday Times or the Guyana Chronicle to read our weekly newspaper column. You can tune into our bi-weekly radio and television interviews. We are, of course, on Guyana Today here on NCN, your favorite station. And you can interact with us daily on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. So ensure that you like and follow us, subscribe to that YouTube channel. And of course, you tune in to NCN for the rebroadcast of this program. Stay safe, everyone. Remember to respect each other and the environment.
Come around, please.
Morning. My name is Deborah. I just want to get some information.
Good morning. I am Odessa Duncan, Senior Environmental Officer. How may I assist you today?
Tell me something. They got this man next door by me breaking on this big building, and it's bare asbestos in the roof. I could remember hearing on your TV program that asbestos is dangerous to human health and the environment.
This is correct. The Environmental Protection Act states that any person or facility that is storing, treating, transporting, and or disposing of hazardous waste material must be authorized by the EPA to do so.
Oh, but it's now I'm really hearing about this hazardous waste thing. Tell me something more.
Hazardous waste are waste material with properties that are dangerous or capable of having a harmful effect on human health and the environment, including things like paint, fertilizers, and pesticides, waste oil, and asbestos. These things have the potential to cause cancer, birth defects, kidney failure, and reproductive impairment, with children being at the highest risk. The environmental authorization in this case gives the legal right to transport, store, and dispose of this material in accordance with the EPA Act Chapter 2005 Laws of Guyana. This ensures you and your operation and your process is safe for the environment and human health.
So you mean to tell me that all them leftover Christmas paint that I got on in my kitchen sink, I need authorization from EPA to get rid of it?
No, Miss Deborah. These items, once used for household purposes, does not require environmental authorization from the EPA. However, you should still take necessary steps to ensure that these materials are stored and disposed of in an environmentally safe manner.
Thank you so much for the information. I go in and tell him that he needs an environmental authorization. Thank you.